Welcome back to the Ghost Podcast. I have taken a little break from recording some episodes, so I feel super excited to be back talking to some new guests. We're riding that post 100 episode high, and today we're going to talk about all about financial stability, communicating about finances and relationships, and really go into what that all looks like. Because finances can be one of the biggest issues for couples. I actually have some interesting statistics. A new survey from Ally, which, granted, I don't know how credible this is, but it's an interesting survey, found that money caused the most stress on relationships for younger adults, which is super interesting. So it was 36% of people said that was their biggest stressor, 18 to 54. It's kind of a wide age range. So we're going to delve into this. We're going to give you some tips on how to become, stronger, better in the finance realm. And I have a great guest to participate in this episode and conversation with me. Sean Gilligan is here. He is a financial planner at Northwestern Mutual. And I'm so glad you're here to chat with me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I'll have everybody know this is my first podcast. So,
Oh my God. Okay, well, I'll be
yeah,
nice. And listeners, be nice. Send Sean some love, okay?
yeah, thank you.
So I guess
Thanks for having me.
yeah, of course, for starters, give me a little background, what got you into this world of wanting to help people, kind of work on their finances, become more financially stable, give people the background.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, I was kind of like I needed to become my own client, right? I was that person who grew up, which a lot of us do with kind of money or finance being like a taboo topic, right? It was something we didn't really discuss in the family. And it was something that was generally kind of viewed as like impolite even to discuss with
Yeah.
friends, with relationship people, with even like coworkers wondering how much money each other made. And nobody ever imparted in me kind of the strategies that existed in the world to really maximize what's coming in, what's going out. And I didn't really know what financial planning even meant or what it looked like until I started looking at it, I guess, for myself. And then once I did, it was kind of this rabbit hole, which we've talked about, where there are a million different ways it can go. I kind of equate it to the medical industry where, like, yes, you have your general doctor, but you have specialists in everything. And the thing that was super interesting for me, I think, was the way that different financial professionals worked to complement each other, not to compete with each other. And everybody has niches, and it's beneficial for people, I think, to have as many people as they can in their life. And what I found was that just the deeper I went in, the more I wanted to learn, and the more I learned, the more I wanted to learn, because it's just kind of bottomless, right? And then
Hmm.
you start to see the different areas it can impact people's lives, whether it's from the basics, which is just, hey, like, let's make sure we can have a conversation about this, to like legacy planning and estate planning and all the crazy stuff. So yeah, that's long story short though.
I feel like that was a short story. That was great. We get
Okay,
some long stories on this podcast, so you're doing good. Don't worry.
perfect.
And I want to go back to what you're saying about how for you growing up, money was kind of taboo because I feel like that's a lot of people's experience. I came from a weird family where we talked about it a lot, and my parents wanted, had me open a checking account at the Young Americans Bank, and they were all about talking about money and what it means and what it's worth. So I feel like I was in the minority. Why do you think, and do you think it's an American thing that money is a taboo topic, or do you think it's international?
I honestly have so little experience to international
Yeah.
familiar monetary discussion
Okay, so here
that
in
I
the
can't
US,
even
yeah.
theorize about it. And I do think too, so I'm in my late 30s, and I do think it's a little bit generational, right? And I think we're getting
Yeah.
progressively more open with finance and social media for all the bad it does. I think it is kind of driving the ability to be a little more open with it. But like what I experienced is when we were little kids, the internet was hardly even around. And so there wasn't this prevailing wind of information, right? So I think my parents thought they were bringing up the hot buttons, right? Which is like, hey, you should save your money, you should like pay yourself first, you should whatever. But we didn't know what any of that meant. We didn't know what it looked like. And it was
Yeah.
hard to really find examples. And, it's not like you're on the school bus with your friends being like, oh yeah, like my allowance is $5 a week. What's yours? What are you going to do with it? Right. So,
Yeah, right. What kind of
um,
returns are you getting on that $5 allowance?
yeah, 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 exactly. And I think too, like we grew up, so I grew up in the mountains in Summit County, and we grew up with not a ton of diversity where now there are a lot of the top in Summit. But then there wasn't really, it was kind of like your middle class ski town, right? So we didn't have really that lower class, or we didn't have that super high upper echelon. And so we didn't have a lot to compare it to, because kind of everybody that was coming in and out of our lives were in very similar situations. Until I went to high school in Vail, because I was a hockey player, and we started going over to Vail. And that's when I started learning that, like, oh, things are a little different, potentially.
Right. And, obviously we're going to talk about how this kind of applies to dating, but it can be such an awkward topic yet again. It's like, okay, it's kind of taboo to bring up with family, but then when you're dating, it also feels taboo to be like, well, here's how much I make. I kind of want us to be equals, or, we want to have a family. How do we even go about that conversation? You know, where do you even begin? I guess let's say in the early stages of dating.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully in the early stages of dating, you're not planning a family and how you're going to
Yeah,
contribute to financially supporting them. That would be potentially like a red flag, maybe, but who knows?
right.
To each their own, right?
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think like the early stages, it's about like keeping what you're doing kind of like financially neutral, right? Like you're not blowing it out on weekend vacations and things. And you're also trying to like keep it in a situation where nobody's getting put into extra pressure, right? And I
Yeah,
think
that's a
there
good point.
becomes this thing where, like, if we were talking about this before the show, if your first date right from the get-go is the fanciest restaurant in town, or um, some super like bougie event or whatever, I think you've set that precedent. Um, and it can backfire. It's just like if maybe somebody's not doing as well as the other person, there's nothing wrong with that, A. But what it can do is make them feel like they need to front, right? And then you need to
Hmm.
front, and you're spending money you shouldn't spend on, like, okay, now we're trying to go buy fancier clothes. We're trying to go buy, go to better places. We're trying to do whatever it is. And I think to me at least, the quicker somebody's just honest about, hey, this is the situation. And I don't even care. Like if somebody had, say, like came in with $100,000 in credit card debt, right? But they
Hmm.
just said that, and they're like, this is what I'm dealing with. I feel super uncomfortable going to these places. I like you, but can we just tone it down or whatever? Then I think it just sets the precedent of honesty. And I think once you set that precedent, like money is what it is. It's just a tool to do certain things with. And whatever your financial situation is what it is as well. So if you just talk about it and then you talk about, hey, how do we improve it together? What does it look like if we move forward? Like, I don't see the thing. I know certain couples, there are definitely people who are like, hey, I want to be 50-50. And that makes it
Hmm.
super easy if you're going to blend finances, right? But if you think about life together, potentially, everybody's going to bring different things to the table. And
Right.
I don't think it has to be one. Like, I have friends who are by far the minority breadwinner in the relationship. Like, she is outering him by 2 or 3 times, and but they've figured out how, hey, like she's just killing it. So what can I do on the other side to make her
Hmm.
life easier so that she can do that? And I think if people
Right.
swallow their pride and be honest, like in the beginning, it's the easiest time to do it because the further in you get, the harder it gets to disclose that like whatever's hiding behind the curtains.
Right. And it kind of goes for a lot of kind of those big things that maybe you feel like hesitant about sharing, when you're in the early stages of dating. And by no means do you need to share, hey, I have $100,000 of credit card debt on date one. Like, I honestly wouldn't recommend that. I
I
actually,
actually,
oh, you
not
go.
to interrupt you, but I
Yeah.
did have a date one, literally a date one, where
Yeah.
somebody asked me like what the financial setup of my breakup from like 10 years ago was prior, literally on date one.
And how did
And
you answer that? Or did you answer it?
I didn't. I was just
Yeah.
like, I just said, this has absolutely no bearing on my life right now at all. And then I was like, what do I need to know about you that is causing you to want to ask this question? Right? Because
Right.
something's spurring that one on. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just thought that was
No, you're
so wild.
good. Yeah, because it's like you can kind of get like a red flag from someone else of like, if you're asking me about this right away, it's kind of like the big topics like exes, politics, and money, and like maybe religion a little bit too. Like,
Yeah.
good to stay away from those on the first date. And I always tell people it's good to kind of have almost like a canned response if someone asks. If they're like, oh, I saw you were married before, like, what happened? You can say, hey, I'm happy to talk about that at a later date. We have a great relationship now, but we're not in touch, whatever it is. Like, kind of have those responses because there is an art to sharing these bigger things, and people don't necessarily need to know that stuff on the first date, the second date, the third date. And unfortunately, I'm not going to give you like a secret special sauce of here's when you should share this stuff. You kind of just have to follow your intuition of when you feel comfortable sharing that. But Sean, you made a perfect point of don't wait until it's too late to share it. And then someone's like, you've been hiding this from me, which I know you have an interesting story about that you might want to share.
Yeah, I mean, so I do, and I think the hiding thing really becomes big, right? Because if
Yeah.
somebody is well, like money just gets used in so many weird ways. People try to use it to control other people or people, you know, it usually is a control thing. And what happened with me was essentially like my ex, who hope she's not listening to this, but if she is, I hope you find her someone great. But her father essentially was like basically trying to buy her into doing certain things, and we like he knew I wouldn't be down with this, so essentially he had given her like a credit card that would just reset itself to zero every month. And so she was shopping and she would get stuff next day or delivered because then she could control the delivery. So it came when I was at work, right? And then that just went into her closet. And this went a whole different way where really it was like a control thing. This was something she could control. And it wasn't so much about the possessions, right? But
Mm-hmm.
it was just like it had just gotten so out of hand, right? That she felt like she had to kind of conceal it. Where, in reality, I don't even know if I would have cared. Like, I would have
Right.
thought it was crazy, but it's not it's not my thing.
Right. And it's like if she has the money to do it, fine, I guess. But, the fact that she was hiding it, I guess, how did you find out and like what was that conversation like, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, it was not really the best kind of conversation. Actually, the conversation was pretty short. How I found out was almost even funnier because I was at work one day and she was like, "Hey, I bought us a piece of land. Like we're under contract on a piece of land to build a house on."
What?
And I'm like, "What is this not something you would do with your significant other, right?" I
Yeah, just
would
on a
have thought
whim.
it was. And I was like, just out of curiosity, where is this piece of land, right? And I already knew the answer because she was like, "Oh, remember that piece of land that butts up against my parents' property that became for sale?" And I was like, yeah, I have a hunch of which one you're talking about, right? And
Oh
like,
my
let me guess, your
gosh.
dad popped for that down payment, right? Because if you're buying some land, you would think, hey, this is something we would probably talk about.
Yeah,
So
usually.
that was just the tip of the iceberg. Like, why are we doing this? This is
Hmm.
clearly not just you making these decisions. So, what are the external factors that are influencing these decisions? And, like, how deep does this go?
Yeah,
And it went pretty deep. And that's probably like the as far as that story can go on here. But
that's okay. People
yeah,
can email you for more information later.
yeah, I mean, and
Just
it's
kidding.
just interesting how like that was just a snowball. It could have been prevented by just uh disclosing all this stuff kind of right from the beginning.
Right. So yeah, it is, it's important to be upfront about the things you're looking for, where you come from. Another thing that I know we had wanted to discuss here was, sometimes maybe you've been married before, now you're divorced, or in a long-term relationship, now you're not together and you're dating again. Sometimes people are still kind of financially tied up with that last person. Like I've definitely seen that. People have even tried to hide that from me when I'm matchmaking them.
Yeah.
um, you know, I guess how does that show up? I mean, it doesn't usually show up well, but I guess what are some things people can do to navigate that? Or do you think, I don't think anyone should be tied up financially with an ex. I mean, unless you have kids together, that makes sense, or you're paying, other things because of a divorce. Very long-winded question for you.
Yeah. So I'll try to kind of like unpack this in life stages from, hey, we're getting divorced, or we're
Yeah.
leaving a committed relationship where we lived together, to now we're going single, to now we're maybe not going single, because there's a
Hmm.
process here, right?
Yeah.
And so the first thing, like when people are getting divorced, one thing that's a huge red flag for me in just the world, and it's one thing that even on the professional side we see magnified, but we're
Hmm.
not going to go to the professional side, so we're just going to talk about the world. Whenever I meet somebody who's like, oh yeah, so and I got divorced, we have a kid,
Hmm.
we didn't have attorneys drop any of the divorce docs because we're just buddies, right? And it's like, well, you're probably not buddies because you just got divorced. And
Right.
one thing you could do for yourselves and for each other is, I'm not saying you have to go to court and try to like take each other to the cleaners, but you at least need to have something formalized so that you both know what needs to happen. Or so when you get into a relationship with somebody else, if they don't like your ex, doesn't matter, because it's the court is kind of created this situation. And one just tidbit I will throw out here on divorce decrees is pay for the other person's life insurance. So if it's required in the divorce decree that you have life insurance, you both do, pay for the other person's. Because if I stop paying on my life insurance, I don't have it anymore. You're not going to know that until it's needed, even
Hmm.
though it's against the law, right? And if you
Oh,
do the
interesting.
same, it's the same. And it can destroy a family. Whereas if you just pay
Hmm.
for the other person's, then you know it's being paid for. You know it's intact. The costs are relatively the same, and it prevents a lot of potential kind of hardship down the road. So that's just on that divorce side. But then let's say people are just moving out of cohabitation.
Right.
That is where it gets, I think, tricky for people, because initially the thought of that is, oh my God, I'm going to have to pay my own half of the rent, right? I'm going to have to pay my own half of the bills. And typically what happens is when people move in together, they're not like, oh, look, now we have this extra cash, so we're going to go, save it or do something smart with it or put it into the slush fund just in case this doesn't work out. And then if it does work out, we can use it for a honeymoon or whatever.
Hmm.
Instead, they're like, "Oh, screw it, let's go out to dinner every night, right? Let's go wild." So people
Right.
go through this breakup and they anticipate the fact that, hey, we're gonna have to pay for our own rent now. We're gonna have to pay for like our half of the utilities and all of that. But what I see people really falling victim to is, even though you like probably want to bag on your ex a little bit. Let's assume they're not a terrible person. And in this relationship, for two people, you're contributing to certain things that people tend to not think about. So when you're all of a sudden single, there's one person to walk the dog, there's one person to clean, there's one person to do the groceries, there's one person to cook, there's one person to do all of these things that there used to be two people to do. So what people start doing is realizing, oh my God, I'm totally strapped on time. I don't know how I'm going to do this. And then they start paying for the convenience or the ability to save time, right? So now my groceries are getting delivered. I'm hiring somebody to come walk the dog while I'm at work. I'm hiring a cleaner to come to the house. And not that these aren't things that people need to do or don't need to do, because
Hmm.
like you have to live your life, right? But people fail to think about the amount of time that it really takes to get back to kind of just square one where you're okay, like living life on your own. Because everybody, I think, discounts how much their significant others are actually doing for them in their lives. Whether or not they're doing a great job or whatever is a different story, but those things have to be fixed, right? So, and then
Yeah.
moving forward through that, when you start to combine things again, then it becomes the talk of, okay, how do we want to structure the money we're putting in? How do we want to do this? How do we keep it safe for everybody? And that's like a whole next step in the equation.
Right. Yeah, I feel like we've just talked through so many different stages of
Yeah.
relationship, which I love. So people can kind of skip around and hear, what applies to them. There's been some interesting situations I've run into where like, obviously we've heard of co-parenting kids, but people co-parenting dogs or pets.
Yeah.
And then you're like financially tied up with this person forever over a dog.
Yeah.
um, which I have my own personal opinions about. I feel like if you get a dog with someone, you should probably like have a plan initially. If it
Mhm.
doesn't work out, who takes the dog? Because do you really want to then be like, oh, you have him on the weekends and I have him during the week? Oh my God.
I've seen that happen. And I think like a lot of it really boils down to just like people being selfish or unwilling to let go. Because I would argue if you look at any breakup
Hmm.
and you have a dog, say, there are two new living situations, or one person is staying in the home that the dog is used to living in for its whole entire life. The other person is going to move to a random apartment or a random another home. And like, where is the dog going to be best? Tends to be a question that if you're just really willing to be honest with yourself, you can answer. But yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen families with multiple dogs who like have separation anxiety and they try to keep them together sometimes, other times not.
God.
And it's
Yeah, I know.
the
We
ones are
laugh
wild.
about it. If you're offended by this, we're sorry, but I don't know. I think always my whole idea with this is like have a plan. Even my husband and I, we bought a house together before we got married, and we literally wrote something up that was like, here's what will happen if for some reason things don't work out. We each own this much of the house until this point, and then once we get married, here's what happens. I know that probably sounds weird to some people, but Sean, I bet you would agree you need that plan, and probably good if it's like officially from an attorney as well.
Yeah, oh, and 100%. Like if you're buying a house officially from an attorney, if you're just
Yeah.
moving into an apartment together, like
Yeah.
have one person have their name on the lease, right? And the other
Hmm.
person can sublease. If you need to put your like significant other in a lease to ensure she's going to pay you her half of the rent, or which I don't even think it should be half. I think it should be percentage based on what you're making, but that's a whole different story. Um,
Oh, I like that perspective. Yeah.
yeah, because percentages are inherently fair, right?
Hmm.
But then if something does go wrong, it's super clean. Hey, I'm already liable for this, so I will stay and keep being liable for this. And now you are not liable for this, so you can go do your thing because we don't have dumb red tape for some reason. And while it does seem to people like, oh my God, that's unnecessary to do all that, or that's a lot, the whole thing I would guess for you guys, after you sign that agreement, it's a big sigh of relief, right? Because now you know you don't need to worry about it anymore. And that's like all of
Right.
what we do is we help people realize problems that could come up. We solve for that problem before it ever happens, and then they never have to worry about it again. So it's like, hey, a little conversation in the beginning can be such a huge relief in the end.
Right. And, I think I want to rewind a little bit back to kind of like pre-dating, early dating, because that's most of our listeners of this podcast.
Yeah.
And we were talking about before we hit record about paying for dates. And I know we kind of touched on this at the beginning, like, if you're setting the precedent of going on expensive, fancy dates, you might put someone off, who knows? But what about, this is always a hot topic of who pays on the first date, the second date, etc. I know listeners know my opinion that I think in a heterosexual relationship, the guy should pay on the first date and it should be something simple like drinks or coffee, nothing expensive. Um, Sean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So, all right. I agree with you for the most part on the
Mm-hmm.
first date, right? Especially if it's like set up through you and there's an expectation.
Right.
My my like if I meet somebody randomly from like a dating site, X experience is there seems to be the etiquette that it is at least polite for her to offer to go Dutch,
Oh,
at
yes,
which point
always,
you
for sure.
decline, unless she's just horribly misadvertised herself, in which case it's like, okay, I'll go Dutch with you because I'm probably never going to see you again, so that's fine. Um,
And there's also some people who like would genuinely be offended by having the guy pay. They're like, "Hey, I make good money, I want to make sure that I don't feel like I owe you anything."
yeah.
So I always tell people too, if she is super insistent on like, "No, no, no, let's split it." If it's like the second or third time for being like, "Let's split it," let her split it with you.
Yeah, see, my thing with that is I'm kind of like, I do believe, and you see it all the time, and I do too, that a lot of women out there now are just doing great financially, right? And they don't need a guy for anything.
Yeah.
And so they do have the ability to pay. But instead of being like, hey, we're going to go Dutch, which eliminates that whole, like, nobody's taking each other out in that scenario. You're just going to do something together. So I'm like, all right, how about I pay for this date and you can pay for the next one,
Oh, I was just
right?
gonna say that. I love that. Yes.
Because I have no problem with somebody taking me out. I just don't want to muddy the waters there where, it's just weird for no reason.
Hmm.
Um, and
And
so
I,
that's
oh, go
what
ahead.
I was gonna say. That's what we were talking about earlier, where I was like, there's a 50 Cent clip where somebody asks him like if he's taking a girl on a date, who's paying that for that date. And
Hmm.
he's like, well, who asked for the date? And you would think like 50 Cent would be like, oh, I'm paying all the time. He's like, listen, if you ask me out, you're paying for that date. If I ask you out, I'm paying for that date. And I actually had this happen to me in the reverse. And
Oh, really?
it was my birthday. And she was like, oh, we should go to Ruth's Chris. And I was
Uh-huh.
like, okay. I was like, this is really nice of her. So we go there. I'm trying to be respectful. So I order like chicken at a steakhouse. She orders surf and turf and a really expensive bottle of wine. Oh my God, this is the best birthday I've ever had. And then the check comes out and she just slides it across the table to me. And I was like, oh,
Oh
okay.
my God.
It's like,
Did you
good thing I
pay?
ordered the chicken because this was a ridiculously expensive meal.
Yeah, and that's an interesting consideration too. Of I like that if someone asks you out. Like one time I had a guy, there's a nice sushi restaurant in Denver, if you're not local, called Sushi Den, and it's kind of pricey. And one time I had a guy invite me there for a date. And so I was under the impression he was going to pay because he picked the expensive place. Like under those terms, um, but we split it. But I will say, took into account, I didn't order the most expensive thing. I didn't pick, a million pieces of sushi. So I think there's also on both ends. things
Did
that people
you,
could do.
whose decision was it to split it? Like, did he just hold on to the bill waiting for you to slide your card out?
Yeah, it was his. I mean, we didn't go on another date, so I guess he just wasn't really feeling it. And I can't blame him because, like, we're not going to see each other again. Let's split it. But still, I think it's the 50 cent principle. If you pick the nice place, you kind of got to pay. Like that chick you and I should have paid. And it's your
Yeah.
birthday. She
Yeah,
should
it was
have
my
treated
birthday.
you.
You should never pay for yourself on your own, unless
No.
it's your idea. You're like, hey, I really want to go sit front row at the Avalanche game because my birthday's in June and that's when they'd be in the playoffs. Okay,
Right.
fine, that's on me.
I know. I always
Um,
joke though, unless you're a dad, I feel like dads always have to pay for everyone on their birthday.
Everyone and friends that come,
Yeah.
families, regardless, right? And that's another like weird money thing from growing up. I don't know if your dad was like this, but my dad had to pay for everything always. It was like
Yeah.
his right of dadhood. And we'd be at just, and he's still like that today. Like it'll be his birthday, and we have to go find the server like back of the house and give a card so that my dad doesn't try to pay.
Oh my God. Yes. My father-in-law is totally like that. My dad now is like, I did enough. You pay for me.
Good, as he should.
Yeah, right. He's like, you went to too many years of school, both you and your sister.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, right.
so yeah, I love the who pays on the first date question. I think, as dates go on, I think it's important to communicate about like what level you want to pay for things, whether you're a man, woman, whoever you're dating, saying like, hey, I'm really enjoying getting to know you. Maybe we can trade off planning dates and just always split the bill, or maybe we can plan like a free date every once in a while. Kind of throwing things out there like that so people know what you're comfortable with. Or like I know, my husband and I, maybe like our fourth date, we went to a Nuggets game, which he invited me to. So he bought the tickets. And then I said, like, hey, before we even got there, like, I'm going to buy our food and drinks at the game.
Yeah,
Because I didn't want to make sure, like, I want to make sure that was known. I was just like setting that expectation right off the bat.
yeah. So in hindsight, that probably ended up being a bad deal for you.
Yeah, right. Because then he's like, oh, 10 beers? All right.
Yeah, you
No,
gotta
he
put a
did not
limit on
drink
that
10
one.
beers. That would not be a fun date. But I will say, we did end up on the kiss cam on that date.
Did
And
you
I've
do it?
never been so embarrassed in my life. I had to. And we'd only kissed like one time before that.
Oh man. But my worst fear is I haven't been to a sporting event with my sister in years. But growing up when we were kids, which in
Yeah.
hindsight, when you're 12 years old, they're not putting you on the kiss cam. But like we would go to Avalanche games because I was a hockey player, and our worst fear was we'd be sitting next to each other and the kiss cam would turn on.
Oh God. And
It
they're gonna
never
put
happened.
two little kids on the kiss cam.
Yeah,
That would be pretty messed up.
yeah. Only happened at Broncos games. Let's be real.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So, I know we've covered so many topics about finances, how to talk about in relationships. Sean, I want to make sure I give you an opportunity to let people know how they can reach out to you if they have more questions, if they want help kind of creating a plan. How can they get in touch?
Yeah, and I would say, one thing we didn't talk about that is probably the most important part in all of this
Oh my God, let's go there
is like financial literacy, right? Like if you two do not have the same just vocabulary related to money, you can't even have a conversation about it because you may think you're talking about the same things, but you could be speaking two totally different languages,
then.
right? So the first thing that we do, and I think probably the thing that is most valuable, is we just give people an overall, like overarching picture of where everything is with their life as it sits. And we give them a context that they can talk about it around. And when two people do that, it's separately, right? If you're not a couple or if you're not married or combining finances, you're on your own. But at least you then have the right basis to have those conversations in a way that you're both understanding what the other person is talking about. And I think that's huge in all stages of a relationship, especially going from, hey, we're casually dating to now we're exclusively dating to God knows what's going to happen next. Like, let's make sure we're speaking the same language. Um,
Right? Good point.
yeah. So, And where it goes from there is everybody's different. Everybody has different goals, different past, and there is no set financial plan that is right for everybody. So for us, it's like, hey, let's just have a conversation and see if, what we do might be able to help you. And if it might be able to help you, then we can discuss what some possible next steps could look like in that. Right. And that's all free. Any financial planner who's charging you fee-based planning just to create that plan, unless you're talking about a ton of money, you don't need to pay for that. So it's just like, be proactive, reach out, have a conversation, and then become a person who takes action in some little way at least to kind of create your goals, right? And so for us, it's like just reaching out directly. I mean, they can call me or text me. I'll say my phone number on the air. Is that even legal?
Yeah, do it, and then we'll put it in the show notes too.
Okay, so it's 970-409-6702. Probably a text is best so you can say who you are and where you got my number so you don't get screened. But then, everything we do is confidential. Everything any financial advisor does is confidential. And the thing I think people will find is the more people they speak to, the more they'll realize that everybody does different things and has different specialties. And you can never have too much, good knowledge in your core.
Right. And even if you're someone who's just like, I don't even know where to begin, I've never even spoken to someone like Sean. Honestly, Sean, I would assume that you are just kind of a good place to start too as a resource if you're just like, I don't even know where to begin. What do I do with my money?
Yeah.
And you're just an easy person to talk to, I will say as well. So, people have gotten a taste for that. So
probably, yeah. And I've people hold us in some weird esteem that like, oh, I'm not making X, so I shouldn't even talk to somebody who does this. And I'm like, listen, you can't possibly imagine the stuff we've seen, both on the high and low end. Like, there's no reason at all that somebody who's like fresh out of college in their first job, doesn't even have a job, whatever, shouldn't just have the conversation, because it sheds so much light on just what's out there. And a lot of people just don't even know what's out there. So like, there is no stigma and there's no judgment. And everything again is confidential. And like with our team, if we have, a bunch of different professionals in our office, and depending what somebody's case looks like and their situation is, we'll bring in our colleagues and assemble a team to serve the client in the best way.
Great. Well, amazing. I hope if you're listening, you have any questions, you can reach out to Sean. Shameless plug that, Sean's also single. So, we were kind of joking that for financial advice, text da 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 da, and for dates, text Abby and she'll set it up.
Oh, yeah. I guess that's a better idea to set up.
Right. Gotta go through me. I gotta make sure these people are a good fit for you. So.
Yeah, it's fair. Fair.
Awesome. Sean, any other parting thoughts, words of wisdom for single listeners?
No, not unless you want to go on for like another 45 minutes.
Maybe part two. Part two coming soon.
Right,
Thank you so much for being here. And I hope people reach out with questions, comments, concerns, or for dates. You know where to find us.
All right. Well, thanks for having me.